Hello, welcome to the program Spiritism Inspiring Lives. The title of the program is to do with our reflections about what Spiritism presents to us in little drops of wisdom that can inspire our lives, our existences on a daily basis. So it's a short period that we will be together here today, and today the theme will be in the face of guilt. Bear in mind that we are all souls in evolution, spirits, immortal beings. We have one existence, one life, and many, many different existences. So we are beings in evolution through centuries and centuries. And here we are as learners of ourselves. When I say here, I mean in the present. Here we are in the best moment of our evolution that we can learn, if we haven't learned, to think more about ourselves, to understand our essence, which is spiritual, that we, through the law of reincarnation, need to come back in new physical bodies, as is in my case, in your case, when we are in the physical body. But it's important to bear in mind that we are not the physical bodies. We are souls in evolution. Sooner or later, through the natural phenomena of life, we will free ourselves from the physical body, but carry on alive, which I personally find quite consoling and very hopeful when we can look in the present, look in the future as authors of our own destinies. So here today, when we learn to think about in the face of guilt, we address ourselves from this integral way, from previous existences, from these existences, and where we are. And we start by saying that guilt is a disturbing shadow in the personality responsible for the unpleasant illnesses. Surely, sometimes we may not even be aware of the guilt conflict or the guilt complex within us, but it's disturbing. And when we are dealing with it, consciously or not, Joana de Anjos is here helping us when she says, is shadow in the personality who is responsible for that. It is due to our own shortcomings, either in this existence, could be yesterday, the last moments, could be from previous existences. And if we don't learn to address that, if we don't learn to analyze ourselves and choose freely to learn to heal ourselves, we can become very ill, or we are very ill already mentally, because we hold, if we suffer from the guilt conflict, we are holding limited, negative self-belief systems, which sometimes we cannot understand on the conscious level. But the unconscious, where is stored all the previous experiences, or inner wisdom, the divine within us, knows exactly when we do, let's say, what is wrong, what is not in accordance to the universal code of love, of goodness. And then we limit ourselves. So we can become very ill mentally, emotionally, and if not tackled at the right moment, that can manifest on a biological level. Therefore, we are also ill spiritually. But don't get scared. We all have a way out of healing. Believe me. Joana de Anjos is still saying here, because sometimes when we refer to the guilt, we always see it or hear or read about in a very limited way. But I actually like what Joana de Anjos brought here for us when she says, I quote, therapeutic guilt prevents the patient from holding it on, turning it into a need for resignification. So again, whenever we are dealing with our guilt, understand we are all beings in evolution. Through the process of reincarnation, we actually embrace the self-healing process. And when we address our guilt in a therapeutic way, in a holistic way, accepting ourselves that we have committed mistakes, that we carry shortcomings on our unconscious minds, that sometimes it reflects on the conscious level, that is not aiming for us to disturb ourselves further. It is aiming for us to learn to observe ourselves, with more wisdom that we carry now within, and also understanding that although we are the responsible ones for the causes of all any guilt conflict or guilt complex, we are also responsible to develop the healing of these processes through the innate ability that we bring within, that we can change the way that we think. And it's important here to understand that our psychic is formed with the ego and self in terms of tendencies. The ego is the level where the guilt conflict is still hooked, let's say. But when we connect with the self dimension, the divine within, and we understand the complexity of our psychic and choose now to embrace it, have ownership of it, then we choose now to learn to think in a different way. For instance, that we are all essentially beings of love, of goodness. Despite of our mistakes, this existence or previous ones, actually what prevails and will always prevail is the love that we already bring within, the goodness that we bring within, although we may not have yet made contact with that, but that is the way that we will recover ourselves, changing the way that we think about ourselves in a constructive way as immortal beings, as beings in evolution, as beings essentially created by God with love in order to learn to love ourselves, to love others, to love life. Love means to respect ourselves. When we are reinforcing the guilt conflict, we are not respecting ourselves, we are not loving, we are really in a lack of self-love within. So in order to help us to understand better which ways we can focus on it and promote our inner healing, we start to reflect about some points that we take from the book, Happiness Without Guilt by Adorno Novaes. And I start by quoting, think of God's love and start a process of recovery towards your maturity that will lead you to happiness. God, we can think, oh my God, does guilt have something to do with God? I would say yes, directly. Sometimes in previous existences or in this existence, because we come from a long journey, we sometimes are quite deluded and we think that God is something that is there to punish us. No, God is the creator of everything and everyone. And God is a loving Father who created us with love and is inviting us to learn to love ourselves and others. That is the real healing. That is the real happiness which we are developing gradually. And in doing so, when we think about God's love, we are already invited to promote our own cognitive way of addressing ourselves and experiences, because that requires shifting our cognitions, shifting our thoughts, loving way. Then we are getting out of this immature level of love, which quite often refers to low self-esteem, the lack of real love. And then we are maturing, we are growing, we are evolving, and we are gradually understanding the divine power from the greatest love that we bring within us, that we are capable of actualizing ourselves. Bear in mind that real happiness is the consequence of identifying my shortcomings, identifying the causes of it in this reflection here today, identifying the causes of my guilt conflict, and then also overriding my old memory through choosing freely to educate myself in repeating and exercising the new way of thinking. I am a loving being in essence. Essentially, I'm a being of goodness, which I can embrace my past and present in a loving way. Yes, I committed mistakes, but I'm not a mistakes. Yes, I have shortcomings, but I'm not a shortcomings. We are more than that. Those are some ways that we can learn to think in a different way. And then we can carry on here with another reflection. I quote, think of a welcoming mother and believe that God is with you, comprehending the process of search for your happiness. I find it quite nourishing, actually, here. Think of a welcoming mother. when we refer to God, that is an invitation for us to connect with the feminine energy within ourselves, because love is the feminine energy. And when we refer to God, that God is love, is the same thing, that we think about it, allowed to get involved in it, so that we comprehend our existences from a loving perspective, that we are constantly the learners of ourselves. There is no reason for us to waste our time or waste our energy in blaming us. So the guilt conflict that may emerge in any one of us in any moment, that is the possibility that is granted to all of us to review our own history from these or other existences, always from the viewpoint of the inner wisdom, that we can choose to change, we can choose to actualize, we can choose to promote ourselves in thinking that we are back as immortal beings on the school earth, exactly having the priority in terms of addressing our inner selves. Within ourselves, we bring our own shortcomings, our own shadows, but we also bring the resources to heal them, to override our old memories, as long as we choose to learn to take the responsibility to stimulate the higher potentials, which is needed. For instance, the free will. When we did or do mistakes, which can be the causes of conflict later on, because we have not been created in order to enter into any disharmony movement. We have been created by love in order to learn to love ourselves, others, the experiences. And this still is quite challenging, I do understand. But bear in mind again, real happiness is only possible when we choose to face our own reality in a loving way. Loving way does not mean permissive way. It means in a very assertive way, so that we put effort into to condition ourselves in the new way that we talk to us, in the new way that we address ourselves. And as we move forward here, I quote, think of accepting yourself as you are, and trust in your capacity of solving the conflicts which you involved yourself in. Acceptance, dear friends, is the ability, the tool that we learn to love ourselves a bit more. And I'm aware that it requires humbleness, humility, because when we are very prideful, very full of vanity, then we find it difficult to accept ourselves, especially our shadows or shortcomings. Because in this inferior complex, the psyche compensates to the superior, then we are more, let's say, even if it's unconscious, in the perfection aspect of ourselves, then we may find challenging to just accept that we are not yet where we sometimes think that we may be. And that for itself, that realization internally is part of the healing, is part of letting go, is part to bring ourselves back to the center and allowing that the progress, the growing, the healing occurs from within. Capacity to solve our own conflicts. We do have them. We bring within innate that. We can, but also it is needed, dear friends, that we slow down more on a materialistic perspective, instead of just running up and down and we don't even know where we're going and rushing up and down as the massification is doing. We choose now to give a step back, so that we have some time to meditate, some time to analyze ourselves, some time to talk with ourselves, to listen to ourselves, and then to compromise with the new ways. Every conflict that comes to the conscious level, that is part of the healing, that is healthy, as long as we do not feed it, as long as we don't identify ourselves with. Because the proposal of healing, to free ourselves from the guilt complex, it is to note it, it is to observe it, the causes of the conflict, and then choosing, gradually reminding ourselves that we have the free will and we decondition from the belief system that feeds them. And when we move on, think of comprehending your limits and strengths. the conviction in the capacity of overcoming your difficulties to achieve happiness. Think of comprehending. Do we know what our limits and strengths are? There is a constant revision that happens within ourselves because we are not static within. Our process of evolution is quite organic, and our inner world is not static, even if you may be unconscious. But there's a lot that goes on constantly. So think of comprehending your limits. As I mentioned previously, comprehending our limits means first I need to become aware of them. And then within this space that we open, the time that we have available to dialogue with ourselves, to observe ourselves, so that we comprehend the causes of the limits. Guilt conflicts, they are based on limited, toxic belief systems. They need to be identified. We need to comprehend that we come from a very, very long journey in our evolution path. But now, although it's almost like I look in the mirror of myself, I can see them, I can hear them, but I can also analyze, this is no longer how I choose to talk to myself. So once I become aware, I make new choices. I'm a valuable human being. I love myself. I'm capable of actualizing my thoughts, my belief systems. I choose to do so. I'm a valuable human being. I accept my mistakes. I'm aware that I'm not a mistake. I choose consciously not to repeat them. I choose consciously to do better every day, every moment. This is a healthy way that we end up dialoguing with ourselves. And moving forward, I quote, think of avoiding the desire of self-punishment and trust that God sees you as a beginner that deserves to learn how to search his happiness in a loving way. Avoid the desire of self-punishment. That is an invitation for all of us to avoid consciously the self-criticism. There is no one outside us that puts us down, but is our inner negative, limited, harsh belief system. We demand a lot. We are critical. We sometimes may be thinking, oh, well, I should be doing that. How did I do this mistake again? Stop, breathe in, say, yes, I know it, but now I know that I only know it mentally. I haven't put in practice, which I choose to do right now, as a being who is choosing to develop, to grow, and evolve. That is the loving way that we address ourselves. God, which we believe, is not punishing any one of us when we commit mistakes. God, which we believe, the creator of everything and everyone in the universe, is a loving Father. So when we are very critical, facing our guilt complex or conflicts, which is referring to our mistakes that we allow it ourselves to put in, and our inner divine consciousness, we will not allow that, let's put negativity to keep on stored within. It will be presented, it will come up, we will feel it. It's needed for that, although it's very uncomfortable, but it's very healthy. So when it comes up, bear in mind, now is the right moment that we can embrace us more in a loving way. I still are valuable human beings. Even when the causes of our conflict comes up, we still are loving beings in essence. There is no reason to be harsh, to criticize ourselves. That will not help us to heal from the guilt conflict. And as we move on here, we learn that in order to help us to expand our rational thinking, think of wanting to do right, being certain that a mistake is part of every process of learning and that happiness is not a simple victory. Do we freely want to do right, to do better, to do good with ourselves, to forgive ourselves, to accept our mistakes, but bear in mind that we are not the mistakes? Do we find it easy to be in contact of our shortcomings, that mistakes are part of the learning process as beginners, as we are, and that real happiness actually happens once we can embrace our own shortcomings. But we will never have victory over our own limitations, reinforcing them. So having victory over our shortcomings, or negative belief systems, or negative thoughts of self-criticism, we are just reinforcing the self-intoxicating process. It's fundamental to observe that, because we all think, but sometimes we may not be conscious of. And we may be sometimes hooked in self-obsessed negative belief systems, especially when we are lacking self-love, when we are dealing with low self-esteem, when we are dealing with our inferior complex. Therefore, we can be very harsh with ourselves. The self-criticism, the self-critic, the inner self-critic can be very strong. They need to be diffused through self-love, through embracing our shortcomings, understanding, I repeat again, we all still do mistakes as learners as we are, as long as we don't do them consciously, and as long as we don't feel pleasure in feeding them. And in that way, we are recovering ourselves in the daily experiences. Carrying on in our reflections, think of confessing your mistakes, sharing the weight of the responsibility of judging yourself with someone who is also in search of happiness. Again, if it's very heavy, the chaotic conflict that we bring within ourselves, let's be or learn to be humble and share that experience with someone who knows more than we do, because when we share with someone who is equal to us, then is negativity with negativity, and we don't get out of that. We have more toxicity. So share with someone that is more mature, that can help us. That could be part of a study group, which is very, very, very healing, because we can allow ourselves to open up. We will realize that it's not only us who have shortcomings, other people too. And that for itself can be a very liberating process. As Joanna started our reflections today by saying the therapeutic guilt that we can acknowledge and ventilate it, yet feeling grounded and beings of value as we are. Could also be, if we don't have that available, that we don't have access in study groups, we could also, if needed, to ask help for a professional. There are many different ways that we always can seek help, as long as we don't stay hooked in a self-obsessed or self-critical way. Guilt, I repeat again, is an effect, whereas the causes of the guilt are our shortcomings or shadows. And we are not the shortcomings, we are not the shadows. They are only experiences that we lived, that we experienced outside the law of love, that we can choose in the present to override our memories and move on, because that is the major objective in life anyway. And as we carry on, think of not be aggressive and develop the ability to transform the energy of anger into determination to conquer yourself in search of your own happiness. It's interesting to see the reflections here, guilt and happiness. When the guilt conflict is dominating us, we are very unhappy beings, because it's there, even if no one outside us can see and know, but internally conflict is this disturbance within. So when we think about guilt, quite often, as I mentioned already, it comes from causes that we avoided the law of love. Therefore, we can be dealing with aggressiveness, with anger, which is this dryness on the emotional level that we bring within. Now we are invited to think in a different way, as valuable human beings as we already all are from our essence level onwards, because the anger, the energy from anger, actually is neutral on the bottom line. As more as we evolve, we will find out that we have two ways of channeling that energy. If I'm more lacking self-control, I'm more pride and selfish is dominated by it, I may not have self-control. There it comes out in a more violent way. I'm using my psychic energy to behave in that way. But if I evolve, I will realize through self-control, I can contain that energy and use the energy now using the free will, directing it towards assertiveness, towards self-control, towards self-healing, towards learning to think in a constructive way. I am in control of what I think, what I feel, and what I do. I'm not the anger in itself. I'm relating with the energy of anger and freely choosing to channel it in a different direction that helps me to grow psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, which helps me to promote myself beyond the egoistic state of mind, where we will have less and less need to control others and more need to control ourselves. Self-control requires discipline. Disciplining our thoughts, disciplining our emotions, disciplining also our actions, or what we say, what we speak. Moving forward, I quote, think of taking the consequences in considering the people that you involuntarily hurt and show them the way to happiness through humility. Humility is a great possibility for us to heal ourselves from the guilt complex. As we take the autonomy in order to restore ourselves without blaming ourselves, we become more and more conscious when we hurt others, or even if we are not conscious how we hurt other people in centuries back. Who's the power in the here and now? In becoming humble, understanding that humbleness is not weakness, is strength, is courage to realize my shadows, my strengths. Humbleness is a strength. As more as we practice and exercise it, the stronger it becomes within, less defensive we become, more in control of our inner self. We are pacifying ourselves. We are building our inner peace. We are really healing ourselves on a deep level, really deep, from the soul level onwards. And then we move forward. We have the will to continue growing and loving. For happiness is a road which we travel on towards the infinite and in the company of God. We are on a daily basis with possibilities to constantly grow further, to develop ourselves further, as long as we are attentive of the possibilities that are offered to us. Bear in mind that we are essentially beings who feel and who think. If you are not aware of what we think and feel, we are enslaved by the old versions or patterns of ourselves. We are here on Earth, this great planet, which is our school, to become more aware of who we are. And in case we become aware of our guilt conflicts, don't waste our time blaming ourselves, allowing that the self-internal critic dominates us. Sit back, breathe in, breathe out, bring the focus back to the center. Bear in mind that we are loving beings in essence, and try to connect with that way in order to relate with the shortcomings, with the wrong ways of thinking, so that we actualize, reintegrate that. It's fundamental that we learn to talk, to relate with the different parts of ourselves and not ignoring them. And in order for us to conclude today's reflections, we say, feel God in you, for he comes through the love that you feel and give. As we started at the beginning, the guilt conflict or the guilt complex is effect from the causes where we used our free will in a wrong way, in an ignorant way. And now, as more as we learn about the natural laws in the universe, which in essence are the law of love, we choose to love ourselves, which means to respect ourselves, to take the autonomy to re-educate ourselves in case we notice limited thoughts or negative thoughts or self-criticism. We stop that, we renew them, we actualize them. And also understanding in our daily existences when we take the opportunity to give, which means to cooperate for the good of others. Because for us to do that, we need to be willing internally to go beyond our egocentric state of mind, where we just in a selfish way think about our needs in a very short level. When we expand that without being aware, as more as we give, as more as we cooperate, as more as we qualify ourselves the way that we give, that we offer, that we cooperate, we are actually promoting our own healing. And we are freeing ourselves gradually from any guilt conflict, because we are taking the autonomy and relate with the divine within us, with the loving part, which we gradually more and more understand that we can stimulate and therefore also connect with the goodness within. We are not the mistakes that we did or do. We are beings in evolution, essentially of goodness. The shortcomings or the mistakes that we do are part of our learnings. And within God's law, the law of love, there is no shortcoming, there is no shadow, there is no mistake that cannot be looked in the eyes of that experience from a loving perspective and saying, well, I did that or I do that, but from now onwards, I choose not to do it anymore. Because my goal, my aim in relation to myself is self-love. So let's try it. It was a pleasure to be with you, and I hope to see you soon. I wish you much peace to all. Bye-bye.